Support for Wavemakers comes from listeners like you and the Tampa Bay Times. The Pulitzer Prize-winning newspaper is available around the Tampa Bay area and online at tampabay.com. Thanks to the Tampa Bay Times for their support.
Good morning and welcome to Wavemakers with Janet and Tom, a weekly conversation with people making a difference. I'm Tom, flying solo today while Janet is away. Today's guest is a Tampa native who has spent the past 20 years writing about science for National Geographic, The Washington Post, the American Psychological Association, and others. Now, Sadie Dingfelder has written a book called Do I Know You? A Face-Blind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. It is part memoir, part scientific investigation, as Sadie explores why her brain works the way it does, and how we really don't know much about what's going on inside anyone's head. Welcome to Wavemakers, Sadie.
Thanks so much for having me.
The book is funny, it's poignant, it's insightful, and one of the main characters is, Sadie, is your dad, John Dingfelder.
Yep.
You might have otherwise know him as a former Tampa City Council member and host of WMNF's own Down and Dirty show every Friday. John is in the studio with us, and he'll be joining us a little later to talk about his own experiences raising a face-blind daughter and whether he even knew it. As Sadie goes down her reporting rabbit hole of discovery, she soon realizes there is a lot more going on in that brain of hers than she first realized. But we'll get to that later. Let's start with, what does it mean to be face blind?
You know, it's kind of interesting because it's really more about other people. Most human beings have a near photographic memory for faces and not for other kinds of things. So if I showed you a rock, you probably would not be able to pick that rock out of a lineup 20 minutes later. But if you meet someone at a cocktail party, you can recognize that person if you don't see them for about 20 minutes. And I just didn't realize how much better everyone else was at face memory than me. And one day, what happened was, I was about 39 and I was shopping with my husband, and he, started filling our grocery cart full of things that we don't normally buy. And so I plucked up a jar of generic peanut butter, and I said, "Since when do you buy generic?" And Steve just looked at me with this horrified look on his face, and all of a sudden I realized it wasn't Steve. It was just some random dude who I was now interrogating about his grocery choices. And so I dropped the peanut butter jar, I ran off, and that was the moment that I first thought, this is not the kind of mistake that normal people make. All the way up to that point, I had sort of followed my dad's ethic in life, which is just to laugh it off and move forward. And, I normally would just be like, haha, I'm so funny, I can't wait to tell someone the story. But for the first time, I was like, I think my brain might be working differently than other people's.
What made you, what is it about that moment, unlike all the probably thousands of other moments just like it, that prompted you to go, I'm going to get to the bottom of this?
It could have just been a random flicker of insight. But I think maybe also when you're younger, you really do just have to kind of soldier forward to the best of your abilities all the time. You're just constantly faking it. And I think that I was sort of approaching middle age, and I was being a little bit more self-reflective because I was in a safe and secure enough place to think a little bit more critically about myself.
And there is a fancy term for this this condition that you have, and I have to admit I struggled to pronounce it when I first encountered it in your book. So you pronounce it for me because I'm not going to even try.
Prosopagnosia.
Yeah, easy.
Prosa, it comes from the word
say that
face.
3 times fast. No, just kidding. But who came up with that, and why is it called that?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So face recognition turns out to be, once I started, researching face recognition, I was really shocked by how much research there is on face recognition and face recognition failures, because it's a rare disorder, relatively rare, and there was just way more research than you would expect. And it turns out that this goes all the way back to at least World War II, when some German soldiers got shot in the brain, and a young psychiatrist named Joachim Bodemer, he got some patients that had lost the ability to recognize faces specifically. And he realized that there must be a part of the brain, a little module for face recognition that's right above your ears, and it's about the size of an almond. And it's one of the most specific things we have going on in our brains. We don't have that much brain chunks devoted to a specific task. Very few other places in the brain have that.
And so this was the result of a traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
And for a long time, it sounds like that's what they thought this was, that people aren't born with this or they don't live with it for the rest of their lives. What did you find?
Yeah, so it wasn't for a long time, until really the 90s. There were only, in the medical literature, they only described people who had acquired face blindness due to brain injury, usually a stroke. And they were always looking for someone who had pure face blindness, who could not recognize human faces, but could recognize animal faces, for instance. And there's a famous story of a shepherd in England who had a stroke. He lost the ability to recognize human faces, but he was able to identify his sheep.
His sheep, which all look the same to me, but...
Yeah, but he was able to recognize them by their faces, and he also was able to learn new sheep by their faces alone. So it's really proved that we do have this module for human faces, and maybe other primate faces that's in our brain, specialized for it. But no one really realized that people might be born with a problem with their face recognition module until the 90s, when the early internet, people were just starting to find each other on the internet. And the first power users of the internet were people with rare disorders. They all found each other. And that includes the people with congenital face blindness, the people who didn't have a brain injury, but were just as bad as the people who do have the brain injury at remembering faces.
This is on a listserv back in the day.
Yes, it was Usenet, I think.
Usenet, okay.
Yeah, it was a Usenet group for rare diseases. I think.
They must have felt very alone before that.
Yes. People, and interestingly, in parallel, a group of face-blind people in America and a group of face-blind people in Germany found each other on their different versions of Usenet. And yeah, everyone loved finding each other. It was such a big deal because a lot of people thought they might be stupid, or they might not care enough about other people. They might be very self-centered. All of these personality flaws people ascribe to their inability to remember other humans. And it's really a neurological issue mostly. So everyone, and then they also traded tips. I found all these great tips, and they're very, very similar to the exact same tips people are trading today in face-blind Facebook groups.
Yeah.
Face-blind book, which are, things like watch television with captions. That really helps a lot to keep track of characters. And make your kid wear hair ribbons at school pickup.
So they don't get in the wrong car?
Yeah,
Or you don't, if you're face blind, you might pick up the wrong kid.
Right.
When you were growing up, did you ever do anything like that? I mean, you mistook a random stranger in a grocery store for your husband.
Yeah. That
can be embarrassing, but did you ever get into a random stranger's car because you thought it was your dad?
I don't have a great memory from my past, which is a whole nother thing.
We'll get to that in a minute.
But I mean, recently I got into the wrong car. I was trying to get in the car with my friend, and I got in the car with a random stranger because she made eye contact with me, and I thought she was my friend. I was wrong. So I'm lucky not to have gotten kidnapped. But the funniest story from my childhood, I don't even know if my dad knows this, but when I was little, I got a set of picture frames of my cousin from my uncle. 3 little pretty blonde girls in these little ceramic picture frames. And I put them up on like a place of honor on my bookshelf right next to my little like sailing participation trophy. And they were there for a long time until my sassy next door neighbor friend came over one day. And she said, Sadie, you're supposed to take the pictures that come with the frames out and put in pictures of people you actually know. And I said, what are you talking about? Those are my cousins. There's Morgan, there's Ariel, there's Alyssa. And as I'm like telling her about my cousins, she pulls down the frame and opens it up, and it is a floppy piece of paper with like a barcode on it. So clearly she's correct. And at the time I was like, I guess the present was the frames.
You didn't recognize your cousins.
Yeah, you can just put stock photos in my frames and I'll think it's my family.
Well, another result of this condition that's related, I guess, is you didn't drive.
Yeah.
You tell a hilarious story, even though you didn't want to drive. You learned how to drive in high school.
Sort of.
Driver's ed. So tell us about that.
So I went to Plant, and when I was there, and I graduated in 1997. So a year before I graduated, I think the summer between my sophomore and junior year, I decided to take driver's ed. And it was a summer school class.
How old were you?
I assumed that I was like 17. I think I was 17.
You could have had your license by then.
Everyone else had their licenses. I had been afraid to learn to drive. My dad had been desperate for me to learn to drive because he was tired of schlepping me to violin lessons and orchestra. Dad was so desperate about this that he bought me a car, like a really inexpensive car, like from a friend in exchange, I think, for money and legal services. And I refused to drive it. I just covered it in like crafts. Like I weatherproofed macaroni and made a huge mosaic. And I put little Fimo clay dragons on it and things like that. So I just decorated this car. And we only drove it once, and it died.
What do you mean we? You drove it?
My dad and I drove it, but I was driving. And we were driving to get the emissions tested, which we were not going to pass. And the car, I guess, knew this, and it sort of locked up on the highway exit ramp. And I believe we abandoned it in like Brandon or something. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you went to Plant High School. You grew up in Tampa, as I mentioned earlier. You went to Gorey and Wilson and then Plant. Mm-hmm. Now, kids, of course, can be very mean. Mm-hmm. So what was it like growing up with kids? And did you have trouble recognizing your friends on the playground?
Oh, yeah, it was. I had so much trouble making friends. When I moved to Tampa in 5th grade, I was lonelier than I'd ever been. And I really didn't.
Where did you move from?
We lived in Cedar Grove, New Jersey for 1 year when my mom was at Columbia getting an LLM. And so, but previously, I mean, we lived in Florida the whole time before that. But, yeah, so when we moved to Tampa, I just had a lot of trouble making friends, and I didn't know what the problem was.
Well, it is hard to make new friends in a new school in a new city.
Yeah, but I'm friendly.
You are friendly. So how did you deal with that on the playground, for example?
Oh, I was just a very, very lonely outcast, and I really never understood like what the problem was, and I didn't really start making friends, like multiple friends. I often had like one good friend who was like visually distinctive. In retrospect, I realize this, but I didn't really figure out how to start making friends in the plural sense until high school. And I never really, and I didn't really figure it out until college. So the point is that I was just like super lonely.
And so, as you go down this rabbit hole of reporting that began when you didn't recognize your husband in the grocery store, did you immediately go home and start Googling, I want to know what's going on here? Or did you immediately, like many reporters, go, this is a good story?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was I started emailing researchers, and I got myself into a Harvard study, and they wanted me to fly up to Boston, and I wanted to pay for that flight without me personally paying for it. So that's when I pitched it as a story to the Washington Post magazine.
And you tell a funny story about that when you go to pitch the story to the editor of the Washington Post magazine, who you knew.
Yeah.
He was a colleague.
Yeah.
You had a hard time finding him.
I did. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So a lot of people who are face blind are also place blind. Your place and your face recognition areas are right next to each other in your brain. And so I just had a system for finding people. I didn't even realize that this was unusual, but I would just sort of follow the maze rule of always turning left until I found David Roll's desk, and I just walked around. I also looked for landmarks, and I also picked up any stray food I found on the way.
Would you look for their nameplates too?
Yeah. 100% nameplates.
100% nameplates, right.
And as a result, I mean, I didn't know a lot of my colleagues' names, and again, I didn't realize this was so unusual. And I also... if someone was sitting in someone else's cubicle or office, like, I would definitely just assume they were the person.
And you go up to them and say, hi, Bob, or whatever.
I know not to use names, right? I don't give it away, but I just start chatting with the person, and then it maybe becomes clear that they are not the person I think they need to be. And most people, I guess, just give you the benefit of the doubt. Or on the other hand, actually, I think I thought I was faking it better than I actually was.
People knew. People suspected something. They can't remember. She can't remember my name or whatever.
Yeah, I think so. I think that happened a lot more than I realized.
So you cleverly convinced the Washington Post to pay for your flight up to Boston.
Yeah.
But apparently not for a room. You stayed with friends.
I did.
Anyway, it's good. They keep hiring you that way. So how long did it take before you published your story?
Oh, I don't remember the exact amount of time. I remember I found out right before. You know what? I started working on the story at Thanksgiving, and I found out right before my birthday. Or no, the story came out before my birthday. But the Washington Post magazine has a long lead time, so. Yeah,
the study that you did was the study that convinced you that you really are face blind.
Yeah, so what happened?
But what I find interesting is that clearly you had all the signs of someone who's face blind. But you were in denial about it, right?
Totally. I don't even know if denial is the right word, but it's like if you spend almost 40 years assuming that you are just pretty much neurotypical and pretty average at most things, it's really hard to suddenly realize that you're in the bottom, 2% of something.
Because you're a successful professional. You went to college. You got a degree. You're a professional writer.
Yeah.
How could you have a neurological disorder?
Right. That's like can be caused by brain damage. So
you kept hoping they were going to say, nah.
It was just like I was completely shocked, but it wasn't. It's funny when you say, like, that's when you found out that you're face blind, because I keep finding it out again and again. It's like one of these things where, a Harvard guy, professor told me I'm pretty freaking face blind. And even since then, several more people have told me, I've done lots of studies.
You've now become the subject of psychological studies and neurological studies, right? I mean,
I'm overrepresented in the vision science data at this point. I'm afraid they're going to stop letting me participate.
You're not only a science journalist, you are a science subject.
I am a lab rat.
You are a lab rat.
Yeah.
But so as you go through this investigation you're doing, you discover other things about yourself.
Yeah.
That might be tied to why you're not driving a car.
Yes.
Or afraid to drive a car.
That's right.
Even though your dad bought you a car.
My dad bought me 2 cars, and I didn't drive either one. And actually, that you just gave me the Volvo. But the question was, why am I face blind? And it's generally pretty genetic, but I couldn't find anyone else in my family who had it. A lot of politicians in my family, they're really good at faces. They can't always remember names, but they know when they know someone and why they know them a lot of the time. So I couldn't find any genetic reason to be face blind. So I realized, I'm just racking my brain, and I realized that I have a vision problem, but I thought it had been fixed when I was a child. When I was at age 1 and age 9, I believe, I had eye realignment surgery. And so it was very surprising, but I learned that my eyes did not align due to a neurological problem, not due to a muscle problem. So when the surgeon sort of yanked my eyes back into alignment, it only fixed my problem cosmetically, but my neurological problem remained. And that's, I think, the basis for my later face blindness.
If you're just joining us, we are talking with Sadie Dingfelder, who grew up in Tampa and has written a book called Do I Know You? A Face-Blind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. Part memoir, part scientific investigation. Now, Sadie, so you are basically, you can't see in 3 dimensions. Is that what you found?
I had no idea. I can't see in 3D. And
that must make it hard to drive.
People who are stereo blind, which means you can't see in 3D, are even...
There must be some fancy Latin term for that too, right?
There's a few terms. People know it colloquially as lazy eye and also amblyopia and strabismus. But I say stereo blind because that really points to the problem, like the functional problem, which is that your brain is not integrating your 2 streams of vision into a single image. I'm always looking out of one eye or the other eye.
Is that because of the lazy eye?
It is an interesting sort of circular cause and effect.
Because there are people who have lazy eye, and you put a patch on it, and when you're young, and it adjusts it, right? You know,
it's really interesting. Even with patching, most people's brains their stereo acuity is still pretty bad. If it's not necessarily as bad as mine, but people are not as concerned, honestly, about how people's neurological part of the equation. Then they just want to get their kids' eyes straight.
But so when it comes to some simple tasks like driving, it must make it hard to just like park.
Very hard to park.
Yeah, you don't back into spaces, do you?
No, like I've never done that. No.
Thank you for not trying.
So it's really interesting because even if you don't know that you're stereo blind or have stereo acuity problems, people are afraid to drive, and they have no idea why they're afraid to drive. And so just like me, I had no idea why I was so anxious about it. I had a lot of sort of... I would say, it's because I don't want to hurt the environment or whatever. But being a full-time pedestrian in Florida was very dangerous and scary in and of itself. So I probably would have been safer driving.
It's scary if you have perfect 3-dimensional vision and can see all around you. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
So I didn't learn to drive, and a lot of people who are stereo blind never learn to drive. But once I figured out why I couldn't drive, and then I did some research and found out that stereo blind people are, quote unquote, just as bad as everyone else at driving. So we generally shouldn't be commercial drivers, but we're fine in terms of normal drivers. Once I convinced myself of this, not necessarily my husband, I decided to learn to drive. And so in this book, I learned to drive.
You do?
Yeah.
Although it takes a while before you drive the mean streets of Tampa.
Oh, yeah, it did. Tampa was really hard. Because I learned...
Even though you grew up here from 5th grade on.
I know. I had no idea how anything was laid out.
And so you can... This was something you discovered during your investigative reporting phase. Then you discovered something else about yourself.
Yeah. Then, once my story came out, I started getting lots of emails. The most fun ones were from people who were like, we couldn't figure out why your boyfriend, you flirted, my cousin had a crush on you and you ignored him half the time and we could never figure it out. Those were fun. But also, I got emails from people who were like, have you ever heard of aphantasia? And I said, no, I've never heard of this. I look it up, and it turns out that other people can do another thing that I didn't even know was possible, which is imagining things in your mind's eye, visualizing things. My brother and I, neither of us can do this.
Can't visualize
anything ever.
Anything. That must be tough as a writer, because if you sit down to describe a scene that you have witnessed yourself, how do you do that?
I take very good notes. I take videos and, good notes and videos. And at the top of every reporter's notebook I have, I write down sensory details, because I know that's a weakness. And I didn't realize I was compensating for anything.
So when you think about, you didn't go to the beach much when you were growing up because you couldn't drive.
I know.
when you think about the beach, you don't visualize the surf and sand. You don't.
No, I think very abstractly about a beach.
Really?
Yeah.
And this is another. So you have a kind of a combination of neurological things.
Right, and this is really common, actually. Like many people with autism and ADHD have any number of the things I've been describing. Like I actually don't meet the criteria for autism or ADHD or dyslexia, but I have a lot of the related things, You
have a package.
I think all people who are neurodevelopmentally different or who, are neurodivergent, I think all of us have our own special combo platter of these sorts of things. And just some of them get you in trouble in school and others just get you in trouble socially. So they don't get diagnosed.
Right. So we're going to turn to your dad here to talk about what it was like to raise a face-blind daughter right after this.
Jazz is alive at WMNF. Tune in Sunday evenings at 8 for Colors of Jazz at our new time, featuring new releases from new artists, old favorites, international jazz from Europe, Asia, and Canada, covering everything from big band swing to bop to fusion. We play it all, plus specials celebrating the music of giants like Ellington, Miles Davis, Pat Metheny, Quincy Jones, Chick Corea, even Frank Zappa. We play the music you'll hear no place else on the radio. Check out our interviews with local jazz musicians. Jazz is what America sounds like, and it's yours to listen to come Sunday evening. If you can't catch us live, play it back from the archives.
And we are back. This is Wavemakers on WMNF. And today we're talking to Sadie Dingfelder, who is the author of a new book called Do I Know You? A Face-Blind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. And as I started reading the book over the weekend, and thank you for lending me your proof copy with your grandmother's notes in it. I thought that was fascinating. But it becomes pretty clear that one of the main characters in this book is your dad, John Dingfelder.
Totally.
Who I've known for decades and was a Tampa City Council member and now hosts a show here on WMNF on Friday. So, John, did this come as a surprise to you when she discovered she was face blind?
Now, Tom, before we get into the really serious stuff, I have to clarify something. Okay, I gave her 2 cars. All right, the first one was a beater. It was like $200. Love's Auto Sales. Okay, down there on McDill.
Oh yeah.
And then the second one. Oh, you said it was the Volvo, a 1975 hand-me-down Volvo that she got in 97. So anyway, I didn't want anybody thinking I'm the big daddy with handing my daughter cars.
Right. But it's good that you gave her a beater because you probably knew what kind of a driver she was going to be.
We suspected it, and her brother referred to it as the macaroni mobile because she did paste macaroni, various types of macaroni all over the car.
Well, did you ever think, wait a minute, Sadie, you know this is your uncle or whatever? I mean, did you have those moments as she was growing up?
We did have probably many of those moments. I just always thought I had a rather spacey child, which was
accurate. That is accurate.
Well, it is accurate to a certain extent, but otherwise, I mean, like you said, Tom, she starting in high school, she was a very, very good student. College, great college, sort of a, what do they call it, the woman's Ivy League college, and the whole bit.
Went to Smith.
Yeah.
Smith College,
pretty
and
fancy.
A very impressive professional life, which doesn't really jive with being spacey, perhaps. But going to your question, so we would have these experiences. We'd be going through Publix or whatever, and these little girls would walk by, and after they'd walk by, I'd say, Sadie, why didn't you say hello to those little girls. What'd you say? I don't even remember.
I don't know who they are.
Yeah, she's like, who are they?
Because they knew her.
Do I know them?
They indicated that they knew her.
Yeah, they indicate they made face contact, or they even said, "Hi, Sadie," and
you just thought she was being stuck up.
Yeah, well, not stuck up, but just spacey. It's like just sort of out there. And I say, oh, yeah, that was Sally and Mary, and we've known them for 5 years, and used to sail with her or whatever. So, yeah.
Well, I'm curious. You had mentioned people forget names. That's a problem I have of remembering names. I remember faces really well. And often it's not a matter of I don't remember the person's name, but I'm not sure. And I don't want to say it and get it wrong.
Uh-huh.
And so you kind of fake it.
Yeah.
Is that kind of, I think that's pretty common. I think a lot of people, especially as they get older, they start thinking, I'm losing my mind, can't remember so-and-so.
Yeah.
Is that related in some way, this phenomenon of not being able to remember somebody's name?
No. If you get to the point where you know someone and you've maybe narrowed it down to a couple possible names, you are so many steps ahead of me, because I'm still at, I don't know if I know this person.
Yeah. and so, John, you learned the news pretty soon after Sadie learned the news that, yep, she's face blind.
Yeah.
Right? And you were still kind of in disbelief, right? You were just still in denial.
A little skeptical. I'd never really heard of it before.
Yeah.
Along with some of these other, issues that Sadie talked about, the stereo blindness and the other one. She did have cross eyes when she was a baby. At 1 year old, her mother and I were, you get upset if your little baby isn't perfect, right? So you do what you do back then. We took her to the doctor. We were up at Shands at Gainesville at the time. Took her there. The Lions Club actually paid for it, which was wonderful because we were still very young and poor. And they gave her that surgery. We thought we were doing wonderful things.
There was surgery.
Yeah, it was
twice. Yeah,
it was eye surgery, which is actually sort of traumatic for young parents.
How old were you, Sadie?
She was a year old.
1 year.
So
First,
you have no memory of that.
I remember the 9-year-old one.
The eyes started drifting again, and we did the patch too, Tom. But the eyes started drifting again. So I think we were up in New Jersey, and we did another surgery because we just thought we were being good parents. And when I'm reading the book and hearing about it, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm a bad parent.
No, this is actually still the standard of care, though. When I started researching this, I was like, well, they didn't know anything in 1980, but I bet they've gotten better. They have not gotten better, but they are beginning to get better. There's these new virtual reality goggles that can train you to use your two streams of vision together through video games. And I got to try one, and I got a lot better, but I'd never really gained true stereo vision.
Tom, some of my favorite parts of the book was reading about Sadie learning how to drive the second time. Okay, I tried to teach her how to drive
as an adult.
Yeah, I tried to teach her how to drive at 17 or whatever, and we'd go into a big parking lot, and that sort of thing. And I gave up pretty quickly.
I almost killed him.
Yeah, then she went all through college and into adulthood, and then her husband, Steve, who's a wonderful, patient man, took it up the second time.
Yeah, and Steve's very quiet, but he is able to emanate extreme stress just with his body language.
And you're still driving.
Yeah, I'm good.
So, I mean, John Dunn, our board operator here, has this question. Has this condition gotten better, worse, or same as you've aged or you've worked on it? I mean, you can work on skills, right?
You mean driving or stereo vision?
I would say life.
Life.
I mean, in some ways, you have spent a lifetime of covering up.
Yeah. And so suddenly deciding to stop kind of lying to myself and everyone else is suddenly sets you back, in terms of skills. I think I was pretty solid with social skills and fitting in-ish and seeming normal. And now that I just am straight off the bat, I'm I'm not going to recognize you. I think that I've had to learn a lot of new skill sets, basically. And I think I'm coming off more awkward and strange, but maybe I'll figure it out by the time I'm 180, whatever.
Tom, it's interesting because, as you mentioned, I was on city council for 10 years. So I was in politics for a long time. And as a politician, you can't afford to be face blind. You know?
No. Although you have a story in your book about someone who's very successful in politics and is face
That's
blind.
right, yeah.
I couldn't believe that he did so well. What was his name?
John Hickenlooper.
John Hickenlooper,
Yeah.
From Colorado.
And, he said that
all
learning...
the way to the U.S. Senate.
Yeah. And he said that learning that face blindness was a thing is actually what gave him the confidence to do these things that he didn't think he was capable of. And he sort of was a late bloomer. He was very anxious, socially anxious until about the time he opened up his brew pub.
Yeah. He was before he was governor, he was a very successful microbrewery owner.
Yeah, but before that, he was a very anxious geologist.
Yeah. But in order to be a brewery owner and be a good customer service representative, it's good to help. It's good to recognize people, right?
And he failed to recognize his own brother who was sitting at his bar one day. And that's when one of his bartenders was like, have you heard of prosopagnosia? So,
no, I can't even say it. But John, her discovery led you to tell her something you had never told her before. And it's, for me, one of the more poignant parts of the book. Can you tell us about that?
Refresh my memory for a second.
I know.
Well, it went back to when she was a baby, and you had her on your lap.
See, again, I was a bad dad.
No, you're not.
I was a bad dad. We were so young. I had her when I was 19, I think, or 20. And anyway, yeah, so of course she wouldn't sleep during the night, which I guess is pretty common. I'd get up in the middle of the night, and I'd bounce her around, and I'd sit on the couch, and I'd probably watching sports or something like that, and I'd fall asleep. And the next thing I knew, she had gone from on my chest, and when I woke up at 8 in the morning next morning, she was down by my feet. So I'm not really sure how she got down there exactly.
But you were convinced that this was the cause of all of her...
Yeah, probably so. I did it to her.
Well, let me read...
Did I do it to you?
No, I was already cross-eyed already.
If you're just joining us, we are speaking with Sadie Dingfelder, the author of a new book, Do I Know You? A Face-Blind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. And we are joined by her dad, John Dingfelder, who had to raise a face-blind daughter and everything that goes with that. If you have questions about face blindness...
This show was previously recorded. We're not taking phone calls today.
And we do have a very patient caller on the line.
Yay.
Fez from Bradenton. Fez, are you there?
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for waiting. And what is your question?
I'm what did you just call it? I
Stereo blindness?
Vision in both eyes, so the streams of vision never cross. You just had a nice word for that.
Stereo blindness?
Yeah, stereo blindness. There you go. I've been stereo blindness for 25 years, but I was born with at least, maybe not as bad as I am now, but pretty bad vision. And I have a theory why I had this kind of neurological problem. Do you have any reasons why?
Absolutely. There's two kinds of stereo blindness. The two main causes. One of them is having a diffraction error in your lens, so basically having poor eyesight, especially if one eye is a lot better than the other. And the other one is having eyes that are not aligning properly. So those are the two main kinds. So you're just in the other category.
No, I mean neurologically, because
why does it happen?
I know why. I know mine happened because my optical nerve got crushed.
Ooh, well, that's different.
This is just what I got afterwards.
Okay, so you're asking Sadie, someone who has not had a brain injury, how do they become stereo blind? What do you think, Sadie? What's the cause of yours, do you think?
What's the cause of mine?
Yeah.
So I think that perhaps I did have a little bit of not enough oxygen. I'm forgetting what that's called. When you're hypoxia, when you're being born, it's not uncommon. And that's a big cause of having a problem aligning your eyes.
Yeah, your mother was in labor for like 24 hours. So.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like mine. I believe that mine was caused from breech birth.
Yeah, and it can also be caused by, it's also genetic in some cases, but not in my family as far as I can tell.
Okay.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, thanks for calling, Fez. Appreciate the call. I mentioned that awkward moment when you told her that story about her falling off your lap when she was a baby, but you also told her something that turned out to be one of the best pieces of advice you ever got for dealing with this.
Yeah,
condition,
and so
right?
if any parents or grandparents are listening, just know in your heart that a lot of times you'll say things and your kid will dismiss it or seem not to even hear it, but sometimes they are listening, and sometimes it's really helpful. So when I was in the grocery store with my dad, all my epiphanies happen in grocery stores, and I think it was Whaley's.
Okay.
Whaley's on Howard Avenue?
Yeah. And I did the thing where I accidentally ignored some former classmate of mine. And my dad pointed it out after we were out of the store. And I said, well, I don't know how to talk to someone who seems to know me. And what am I supposed to say to someone if I have no idea who they are? And my dad was like, you don't have to know who someone is to talk to them. Just ask them questions about themselves and they'll think you're the most fascinating person in the world. And I was like, oh my God, really? And I took that back to school and it changed my life. I went from having 2 friends to having a whole campus full of friends who I didn't know who they were necessarily, but they were all my friend, and it was way better.
And tell me how you did that. I mean, let's say in an hour he recognized you. What are you going to do? How does that play out?
Yeah, I mean, I live my life being very friendly to strangers. Again, I'm lucky not to get kidnapped. And anyone who looks in my direction, who looks sort of towards me, I will just start talking to. I'll make eye contact and have a nice conversation with them. And they'll, just in case there's someone I should know.
And I don't think I can take all the credit for that, because if you think about Grandpa Simon,
he did the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. He never, he never met a stranger. And really, again, the basis for my political career, going door to door, people didn't want to talk politics, Tom. They didn't want to talk about those issues. What they really wanted to talk about, or at least from my perspective, was their beagle or their gator flag or whatever. And if you start those conversations, you make a connection.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Sadie's talking about.
But how about remembering people's names? Have you ever struggled with
I'm
that?
the same as you, Tom. I'm not good with names, but I'm really good at faces, which is ironic considering Sadie's
So you
deal
see
here.
somebody and
Totally. I know
that guy gave me $500 for my city council campaign. That's someone I need to be nice to.
Or as Lynn would point out, I'd say,
Lynn is your wife.
They have a beagle and a gator flag, and they're over on Empedrado. That's the kind of memory I have.
Wow.
Have you dealt with people, Sadie, who are struggling with this issue of trying to remember names and just can't?
Yes, that's a thing. It's called lethonomia, and one thing that's interesting about it is that most things, if you survey humans, we all think that we're above average at most abilities, but name memory is something that everyone thinks they are worse than average at. And the reason is because our modern society makes us remember too many names. We meet too many people. I forget the number, but we're only supposed to remember 180-ish people, in hunter-gatherer times. That's all you had to remember. You saw them every day of your life, basically your whole life. And it was not a problem to remember those people. They probably didn't know who was face blind back then, because I could do that, right? But everyone thinks they're bad at faces because modernity makes too many demands on our brains. And actually, that's a part of a larger theory, because you'll hear a lot of people, boomers like my dad, say, "Oh my God, everyone's neurodivergent these days." And the thing is, I think the amount of neurodivergence is the same, but our ability to hide it and to fit in it's harder and harder, just because there's more and more demands on our brains.
Well, there's a similar, maybe it's related, I don't know, thing about colors.
Uh-huh.
Right? My wife and I often joke that I'm colorblind.
Uh-huh.
I'm not really colorblind, but there are times when I have a hard time distinguishing certain colors from other colors. Are you colorblind?
I have a chromatic aberration, and
There is a word for everything in this conversation.
Yeah, so just like with every human, sort of dimensional trait. It's a continuum, right? So there's people who are really quite colorblind who actually even see the world like a old-timey television in black and white. But there's...
Do they dream in black and white and visualize everything in black and white? Do they remember things in black and white?
100%.
Because they've never seen anything in color.
But you know what else?
What?
If you get brain damage and lose your ability to see in color, over time you lose your conception of color and you start dreaming in black and white. But it's not black and white like a black and white movie. It's actually more like everything is shades of gray. One painter who became colorblind he thought everything was cast out of lead.
And do you dream?
Yes, I dream. Yeah.
In color, but in 3 dimensions? Or
I assume that my dreams are quite 2-dimensional because I cannot even imagine what 3 dimensions looks like.
If you're just joining us, we are speaking with Sadie Dingfelder, the author of a new book called Do I Know You? A Face-Blind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. And I wanted to mention that noted face recognition expert John Dunn is operating the board today.
Tom,
John.
I know I'm totally biased as a proud dad, but one of the things I think is really neat about Sadie's book is it's not just a science book. You know, she weaves in her own life stories, which everybody who does pick up the book just finds really, I think, endearing and fascinating. And the other part is, I think there's really good lessons out there. Sadie, you can elaborate a little bit more in terms of overcoming whatever your issue is. You know what I mean? And Sadie has 2 or 3 specific issues that she's talked about.
And you also have advice for parents or family members and we're going to get to that in a second. No, that's okay. I want to ask you, though, something that I found fascinating in your book, which was there's a racial component to this. Right?
Well, yeah. So people become experts at the type of faces that they see the most when they're quite young. And so there's great research where there was an African-American guy who was raised in Japan, and he thought that all African-Americans looked alike. And he was excellent at telling Japanese people apart, and vice versa. And so it's all about the types of faces you see when you're a baby. So get your baby introduced to a wide variety of humans, and they'll have a lot more ease later in their life.
But there's a part of the book where you talk about, I guess it's your 4-month-old nephew who is recognizing his mom across a room, and I think you might be struggling to remember if is this my nephew? But tell us, what is it about? Did you ever not recognize your dad?
I definitely thought a random dude was my dad once.
Was that in a grocery store too?
Yeah, it was in a grocery store.
Everything bad happens in grocery stores.
I think that was a hand-holding event, wasn't it?
Yeah, I grabbed some random dude's hand. But, and sometimes it's like, well, were you really looking? And I'm not sure. But I do think I would do these things more often than neurotypical people do.
Well, let's talk about that term, neurotypical versus neurodivergent, because in the book you talk about all these different ways that people are different neurologically.
Yeah.
And we're talking about neuro. We're talking about nerve endings in your brain. Is that basically what we're talking about?
Yeah, we're just talking about your brain.
You're just talking about your brain. So basically, you have come to the conclusion, or the researchers have come to the conclusion, there's really only 2 kinds.
Well, it's interesting because, there's so many different labels, like ADHD and autism, for instance. But every human ability occurs on a spectrum, right? And so these are often arbitrary cutoffs, and they often... most people, if you have a single sort of neurodivergent label, you almost certainly have 2 or 3 more. And so these are all highly correlated things. And so one thing that researchers are sort of starting to, it's called transdiagnostic research, where there was this great study where they did structural maps of all of these children's brains, and they also had these children's diagnoses, and there was also normal children in this big group. And they made them take a bunch of cognitive tests. And they found that there were there were the kids' diagnoses did not map to their brain structures at all. So basically, I don't want to say they were all like misdiagnosed, but there seems to be no relationship between physical reality and our DSM diagnoses. And so what instead they found is that there are people who have, I wouldn't say two groups, right? Because it's still a normal curve.
It's a spectrum. Yeah, it's a curve.
But
right.
if you make a cutoff, like two standard deviations away from the mean, so like the top and bottom 2% of people, we all have something in common, which is that we tend to have these brain networks that are more like daisy chains or like a circular bus route instead of the hub and spoke networks that are more neurotypical.
Gotcha.
This show was previously recorded. We're not taking phone calls today.
We do have a couple of callers waiting. Let's get to Chet in Brandon. Are you there, Chet?
I am.
What's your question?
I have a comment. You've been talking about head injuries, and I've been in and out, so I don't have the big picture of what you're talking about. But I've suffered head injuries since the age of 4. I had a pretty good one. Living in the project, got my head bashed in with a 2x4, and then at 17 with a tire iron, and then I've had several more, and the one in 2019 has seemed to have a great effect. But if I can comment on what I've noticed with it, looking back, I've probably had 7 pretty good head injuries and concussions and race cars and so on and whatnot. But looking back, because of the time, I can see that the brain heals to a certain extent. Damage was caused, and then the brain heals, but it doesn't heal fully to what it was prior to the injury. And I've noticed that over the 6, and especially when I was diagnosed, I'm fully disabled because of the head injuries, according to Social Security. But what I noticed that one in 2019, and now we're at 2024, that the brain does heal. But now I have certain issues. You were talking about memories. Jesus, my God, I'll get up from my table and walk out to the garage, and I'll stand, what did I come out here to try and get?
Well, that's pretty common as people age, right, Sadie? I'll admit that happens to me occasionally. I was just walked out in the garage like, what was I out here for?
That is pretty common, but you know yourself, and if it's happening more often than it used to, it definitely could be a result.
You should go check it out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Chet, thanks for calling. Appreciate it. Do want to get to something that John had mentioned, which is tips. You have tips for parents. You have tips for people who have this condition. Tell us what you recommend if someone suspects that their child or relative is face blind.
Yeah, 1 in 20 kids are face blind. So it's like rare, but it's not crazy rare. And so that means that you probably know a kid who's face blind. And you can tell that some of the good tells are we have trouble following the plot lines of movies, or maybe we prefer animation to live action, because in animations, everyone wears the same clothes all the time. And if you have a kid like this, there's a lot you can do to help. Setting up small play dates with just like 2 friends, huge help. You can also, sort of have problem-solving discussions with them that are age-appropriate. Like, do you think you might be less good than average at, remembering people? And like, let's talk about strategies that you can use if you don't recognize someone, including just asking them who they are.
That may seem a little, may seem rude, but it works, right?
Especially for little kids, yeah.
Right. Okay, we don't really have any time left, I'm sorry. But can you tell us where people can get your book?
I'm everywhere. And I did an audiobook, and I had to audition to play myself.
And did you succeed?
I did succeed.
You're going to be, if you get the audiobook, we'll hear your voice.
Yes.
Thanks for all of you who were listening, and don't forget our podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts or on the WMNF archives. Coming up, NPR News followed by Wide Awake America, hosted by Nadine Smith. This is WMNF Tampa.